Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our Rewild Long Island webinar, Ecoscaping with Water by Joy Cirigliano. So it feels like fall already as we prepare to put our gardens to sleep. Some of us are probably also planning for next year. Many will have placed orders for native plants and trees and waiting to pick up their orders in October. I've often thought about a small water feature to add to my native garden and add natives that thrive in a watery habitat. But the hows and the wherefores have been a deterrent. I'm sure many of you have those same questions or want to explore a new addition to your native patches. Joy is here to answer some of those questions and guide us in ecoscaping with water. Joy Cirigliano is a senior coordinator of bird-friendly communities for Audubon New York at the Theodore Roosevelt Sanctuary and Audubon Center. She's an ecological landscaper, environmental educator, and natural historian. She has been running through the woods since the age of 6 and playing in the dirt since the age of 8. She's passionate about how ecosystems work and the profound effect humanity has on nature. So without further delay, I'll hand it over to Joy.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Joy Cirigliano. I am the Senior Coordinator of Bird-Friendly Communities. I do lights out and dark skies, also bird-safe buildings and plants for birds. And basically, this is what this presentation falls under as plants for birds. Ecoscaping with water basically means focusing on plants that prefer wetter areas or creating artificial water sources in our home and commercial properties. And then using the appropriate plantings to mimic a real natural setting, a wetland area, water source, using native wet-loving plants or plants found in wetlands, floodplains, and areas that are frequently inundated with water. So ecoscaping is the phrase that we use, but ecoscaping is a phrase that some people don't really know yet, and we're hoping that it's going to become much more popular in the coming years. Ecoscaping is landscaping with native habitat and ecosystem services in mind. So we call it things like naturescaping. We call it things like stewardship gardening. We also tend to call it habitat gardening, wildlife scaping, sustainable landscaping, environmental landscaping. So this is what pondscaping or waterscaping falls under. So you're going to be building an artificial pond or a bog or a stream or even a container or a bird bath is considered waterscaping. So today's presentation, the specific type of ecoscaping is where we work with water. And the importance of water is huge. Every organism on the planet, all life needs water. And we're going to include plants in that too, because plants are living organisms. So as long as you're not a rock or a mineral, generally you're going to need some sort of water to keep you alive. You need it for drinking. Most larger animals need actual water sources. So it could be a pond or a lake or a stream, a creek, or even a puddle. And some of them will drink only at dawn and dusk, and then they'll go out about their business during the day and then come back to their water source to drink in the evening. Deer are sometimes like that. They usually are what they call crepuscular dawn and dusk. Some of the other animals, notably the insects out there, this is a damselfly, they actually will drink the dew in the morning and in the evening to basically get their water from their water source. So that is a very small water source. And there are a number of animals like desert tortoises and some insects that will get all the water they need out of the plants that they eat. So desert tortoises usually eat cacti, and our caterpillars generally tend to eat whatever it is that their host plant is. So this is what we have. Many animals, especially certain bird species, actually need water to bathe in too. It helps them to keep their feathers in good condition. And many birds also take dust baths to help them reduce parasites. So it's useful to create a dry patch if you're going to put in a water feature. Put a dry patch in there too if you want to attract more birds, because they like their dust baths. It reduces the parasites on their wings. And they prefer to, some of them, again, birds, most of the time, very many of the birds are solitary bathers, but occasionally you will see your community bathers like these cedar waxwings. And it does make sense to take a community bath, because if everybody's looking in all the different directions, that means that a predator has a harder time sneaking up on you if you're a bird. So that's generally why they do bathe in groups, but solitary birds will usually duck down, look around 2 or 3 seconds, make sure no one's coming, there's no cat sneaking up on them, splash around for like 5 seconds, and then fly off. That's their bath. But they need to do it at least a couple times a week, preferably more like once a day. In the winter, they don't usually bathe frequently, too cold, but in the summertime, they take baths frequently. So with all other animals will use it in addition to bathing. A few species of animals need water to breed in. Things like frogs and toads and newts or salamanders. The amphibians only breed in water bodies, and these water bodies have to be clean because in order for them to breed successfully and also to survive themselves, their skin is so thin and transparent that they need to have clean water to be able to both breed for their eggs and also because their skin is very permeable. So any toxins in there will kill them. They are basically canaries in the coal mine when it comes to making sure a water source is clean. They're biological, what they call a biological indicator. So if the water is clean and pure, you have lots of frogs and toads that are using it as a breeding station and also to live in. And if the water is not clean and pure, you either have very strange looking frogs and toads or no toads and frogs at all. Dragonflies and damselflies are also really good to have around, and they are attracted to ponds and water sources and splashing water. Dragonflies and damselflies eat mosquitoes as both adults and as nymphs. The nymphs eat mosquito larvae, and the dragonflies and the damselflies actually eat the adults. So if you have a large dragonfly, it'll eat a couple hundred mosquitoes a day. If you have a smaller dragonfly or a damselfly, it'll eat about 30 of them a day. But the nymphs in the water are actually knocking down the larvae of mosquitoes by about 25 to 35 to 40 a day. So a good active nymph population of damsel and dragonflies will reduce the mosquito population by 35 to 50%, which is really good. So I love dragonflies. As mentioned before, why am I not advancing? Thank you. Unfortunately for wildlife, especially here on Long Island, the water sources here tend to be compromised. So we have pollution, man-made materials leach harmful chemicals into the water. We also have air pollution, which doesn't really help us, but at least it's not in the water most of the time. VOCs, volatile organic compounds, they're what they're called. But we have things like treated lumber, which leaches chemicals, and oil and grease and gasoline and the fumes from cars and power tools. Plus, we have road salts and brine treatments and fertilizers and pesticides. And again, the heavy metals and toxins from our roofing shingles and the asphalt that we drive on. So our roads. So these are issues that we have that unfortunately do leach their way down into our water. And tree roots and plant roots generally tend to mitigate that because the plants and trees can pull the VOCs out of the air into their tissue through the little breathing holes called stomas, and then break these toxic compounds down into smaller usable compounds. So it's really good to have native plants by your water course, especially if your water course is in a little decline area, because all the water that pools onto your property and slides down there are coming from road sources or from neighbors' houses and things like that, may have chemicals in there. So you do want to have at least some greenery around your pond. The traditional landscape design, most of the properties, yeah, they'll have a bird bath. If you're lucky, they'll have one bird bath. But there are very few that have ponds or streams or waterfalls or other water features in them. So habitat for most wildlife is also reduced in these landscapes, and this is a traditional landscape design that most of the landscapers out there are using. So we want to try and put as much habitat back in as we can because it has been reduced so much compared to what used to be here before we built so many houses and streets and malls and industrial parks and dumps and recycling centers and other man-made infrastructure, I guess I will call it. That's a nice way to put it. So what we really want to do is we want to create more corridors for wildlife to live in, more ecological function in the yards for cleaning our air and cleaning our water, cleaning our soil. So plants and trees do this really, really well. And adding a pond or a bog or a bird bath is really, really helpful for the wildlife out there that needs to drink at least once a day. So there are a number of different types of water features out there. We have ponds, bogs, streams, rain gardens, and bioswales, which I've lumped together because they basically will either hold water that has been pooling or will pull the water away. Right now, you're looking actually at this is kind of a combination bioswale rain garden because it is holding water, but it's also bringing it down like a little creek to a holding area, which is right in the front of the picture. Um, Bogs are soil-filled basins that stay constantly saturated, and they can be put near the gutters so that you can have them constantly filled, or a low-lying area so that they stay reasonably wet. Ponds are basically small bodies of water that you can either build yourself, or maybe they're already on your property if you're really lucky. And then we have fountains, containers, and bird baths, which are very, very small water sources, but still attract a number of wildlife. The birds are definitely going to bathe in it. You won't get frogs and toads, but you'll probably get dragonflies just visiting over the top of it, eating the mosquitoes that are trying to lay their eggs in them. So even a small bird bath helps. So the first that I'm going to talk about is a pond. A pond is great for attracting birds, amphibians, and dragonflies. And you can put the plants directly into the water or around the edges or both. You could add a waterfall or a stream or a fountain because birds really like the sound of splashing water. And again, I am very bird centric because Audubon uses birds as a lens. Basically, everyone has a good bird story. Most people enjoy birds. Birding is the second biggest hobby after gardening, I'm happy to say, in the United States. So gardening is still number one, but birding is number two. And most gardeners that I know generally tend to look at the birds and want birds in their yard. So again, Audubon is really focused on that piece of it. So submerged and emergent vegetation can attract your breeding frogs and toads, which will attract herons because they like to eat those. The tadpoles are also in the water, which are going to eat more mosquito larvae. So there are good, what they call biocontrols, biological controls out there that if you don't do anything, things will stay balanced or reasonably well balanced. And plants at the edge also act as cover for the quieter wildlife. If a chipmunk wants to run up and grab a drink of water, it's going to want to try and skulk under something, not compounding out across the grass. So if you have some cover leading up to the pond that's 2 or 3 feet tall, that usually helps the smaller wildlife to get to the pond and drink and then leave again. So there's a lot going on in a pond. For fish to survive the winter, the pond should be at least 18 inches deep because otherwise it freezes and the fish die. Some of the stones at the bottom of the pond are very helpful for basically securing your vegetation. And wood frogs, if you want wood frogs, will not survive in what they call a fish pond. So if you put fish in there, you will get certain frogs, but you will not get all of the frogs. Wood frogs generally tend to lay eggs in very quiet water, and the fish generally tend to eat the eggs. So they want to have a pond where there are no fish. So depending on what you're trying to attract, these are things that you're going to need to know. Um, Wood frogs actually use vernal pools, which are the ones that they come in the spring and then they dry out by summer. Um, so you definitely want submerged vegetation to hide the frog eggs, the tadpoles, the small fish, and all the other things that you have living in your pond, and also the predators that are trying to catch the prey animals like your damselflies and dragonfly nymphs are going to want to be crawling around and hiding so they can grab mosquito larvae, as they go up to get air, because mosquito larvae breathe air, as do the dragonfly and damselfly nymphs. Um, a step up or a shallow beach, like right there on by number 3, is very helpful because that's useful to assist frogs and turtles for getting out of the pond, because sometimes you will get a turtle or two that wander in. If you have a pond nearby, they will wander into your pond too. And it's also good for birds for bathing. So nice to have a shallow into a deep area. So ponds are really wonderful. What you need to also do when you're looking at the feature that you want to put in is you really should assess what you have, where you want to put your pond or your water feature. So it's not just ponds, it's also bioswales, it's also bogs. And you should try and use the trees and shrubs and the perennials found in the local ecoregion around here. For the purists, and it's Long Island natives and only Long Island natives. For the ones that are not as pure, native cultivars, as long as they work and functional in the ecosystem, great. If they're further south, that's actually pretty useful also, because with climate shift and with climate change, our southern natives are going to wind up coming north, and they're not going to be able to migrate quickly enough because plants do in fact migrate. So if we help them out by moving things like Itea further north quickly, by planting them here, even though they don't really live here now, when climate does shift, and it is shifting as we speak, the plants will be here and the insects are going to arrive before the plants do. So the plants will be here waiting for them because we have moved them. So that's my stand on native versus nativar versus southern natives. I love coneflower. Coneflower is not native to Long Island. I don't care. It works and I'm using it. So you don't have to. You can do straight natives. If you live next to a park, you should be doing only straight natives. Because if you live next to open space, you're infecting open space with open pollinated plants and flowers, or plants that are pollinated by bees. And if they have the same plants in that area there, and you have a nativar or a native cultivar, that bee or whoever is going to carry the pollen into the open space and basically pollinate to make a crossbreed. So these are tricky things that we have to think about when we garden, and many of us don't really think about that. But if you are leaning toward rewilding and you're leaning toward doing native plants and things like this is something that needs to be considered. So a comprehensive site analysis basically includes ecological considerations. And so you have to make your plants fit the lighting conditions that you have. Don't chop the trees down, leave the trees up, and use shade plants. If you have a really wet area, and again, we're going to use the USDA wetland indicator status form, which hopefully is going to be in the chat. But the wetland indicator status from the USDA is used to create lists of companion plants. And you actually can search now because they have the wetland indicator plant lists for all the different wetlands in the United States. So if you go in there, you can actually put in, do you want a tree or a shrub or a perennial or an annual or a biennial, and it will give you the list of those plants that live in wetland or obligate wetland, OBL. They don't do facultative wetland, they only do just the straight wetland species. But then you can also go into USDA and search by the plant name to find out exactly where it lives. And it will tell you either obligate wetland, facultative, which means it could be either or. Most of the time it's found, obligate means it's almost always found in a wetland and rarely ever out of a wetland. Facultative wetland means it's going to be found in the wetland, but also occasionally out of the wetland, and can survive inundations and also some dry. Where facultative becomes more of a moderate, it can be wet or it can be dry. So things like panicum, switchgrass, that lives in floodplains. It can be really, really wet. It can be really, really dry. It can go from the extreme, and it goes from sun to part shade. So it's a pretty functional plant wherever you put it. So this is what you need to take into consideration when you're going to be planting plants in a wetter area, that if you're doing a rain garden, if you're doing a bioswale, but not necessarily if you're putting in an artificial pond. So we'll get to that in a little while. But ponds can be created using rubber liners. You can use poured concrete or fiberglass. They have preformed plastic and PVC basins that you can put into the ground. And you can also add waterfalls and streams for that splash effect, because the birds really love the sound. Fountains too, in the middle of your pond, can fountain up for additional splash. Make sure that the pump size is the right size for your pond. Generally, a small pond will be a 500 gallon per hour pump. So just speak to, if you go to, sometimes they sell them at Lowe's or Home Depots, but they also have places that you can go to on the North Shore. I think there's one up on Scherer's Water Gardens, and they know what equipment that you're going to need. You have to make sure that your pump matches the length of your pond, the depth of your pond, the length of your stream, the rise on your stream, because not only do you have to go 10 feet in one direction, but you also have to do the incline besides. So it could be a 10-inch or 10-foot, a 10-foot stream, but if you're going up 6 degrees, then it's actually more like a 15-foot rise. So you have to make sure that your pump is going to do that, plus the height of your waterfall. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration. As long as you make sure that your pump matches, you will always have good circulating water, and that's something that you need. And the splash factor works really well for mosquitoes too, because if the water is always rippling, the mosquito larvae drown. So that's really kind of cool. Make sure the water ripples, because that will populations down. Another thing that we can do is bog gardens. They mimic marsh or swamp. They stay consistently wet, and the soil is almost always saturated. If you don't want it to be a giant puddle, you can poke a couple of holes in the bottom. You can use a kiddie pool. You can use a preformed pool. And the plants that you find in this particular kind of garden, you're going to fill that basin with dirt, and then you're going to plant right into the basin. And the plants that you are going to plant in there are going to be what they call obligate wetland plants or facultative wetland plants, which live in consistently moist soil. So cardinal flowers and plants like that, Joe Pyeweed loves it really wet. Cephalanthus, which is buttonbush. Ilex verticillata, which is winterberry holly. These all love it. And we're going to go through a huge list of plants in a little while. So we will learn about what you can put in your bog garden very shortly. Also, man-made streams. You can have rubber liners, which is what I have in my yard, or you can do poured concrete, which is what this picture is. Also, fiberglass works reasonably well, and preformed plastic and PVC courses are sold at the local stores. You have to install them on a bit of a slope, otherwise it doesn't flow. It has a real hard time if it doesn't have a little bit of a pitch to it. And you need to edge it with stones or native plants to hold it in place, because once again, it's a liner of some sort. So you don't want to have the liner showing. Generally, we tend to hide them with stone, or once again, you can have the plants growing over it so you don't see it. And I usually also suggest in the bed itself, you put in like little river rocks so that it looks more naturalistic. So once again, you got to make sure that pump size is suitable for the stream length. And I do have a solar pump on mine because I don't have electricity out the front of my house. So the solar pump works really well. And it's a 500 gallon per hour solar pump with a 10-foot stream and a 2-foot waterfall. And it goes down into a 15-inch deep pond. So that's pushing an awful lot of water. And yet it's solar powered. Solar has come a very long way. You can also waterscape for stormwater mitigation if you have a problem in your yard that's down by your driveway. Everything flows down to the end of the driveway, or the street floods and it comes over onto your lawn. We can mitigate and use stormwater retention basins. But basically, any rain that falls on our properties should really be staying on the properties. The reason that we're having problems right now is because grass does not really absorb rain all that well. And when we have a drought, the ground tightens up, and then when the rain comes, it comes so hard that the ground can't loosen up to absorb the water quickly enough, and so it flows into the street. Also, grass roots are only about 5 to 6 inches deep, whereas native plant roots go all the way down, sometimes 6 to 10 to 15 feet, and then if you're trees, they go down 50 to 100 feet depending on the height of the tree. So it's really good to have these things on the curbside if you have a problem with road runoffs. So we want to, for those hardscapes, again, causing those road runoffs, we want to use rain gardens, bioswales, and retention basins, which basically a retention basin is a sump. And they're usually pretty big. So I don't recommend this for someone's yard, but you can do something smaller. Again, a rain garden is something smaller. So infiltration basins, percolation ponds is what they call them. The same thing as rain gardens, only much, much bigger, and use the exact same plants in these public areas that you would use in your own yard, if we decide that we want to transfer a sump into a functional ecosystem. So I've done some of this kind of work myself. I know of a couple of Audubon chapters that have done this kind of work too. It's really wonderful, but the same plants that you use there, you can use in rain gardens. So again, we saw this picture before. This is sort of a combination rain garden bioswale because it's running down the street. It's also picking up the stormwater that's coming off the road and also off people's lawns and also off of the pavement that they have as their sidewalk. So it catches the water, and the plants use their roots to pull the water down into the ground. And again, some of these native wetland plants and the native floodplain plants, the roots can go about 10 to 15 feet down. And it's really wonderful too, because in the wintertime, about 80% of a native plant's root systems die. And that becomes capillaries to pull the water down into the ground, which works really, really well to basically mitigate flood, because now you have all these little holes in the ground that are pulling the water down 10 to 15 feet, which is terrific. So it works out really well to use rain garden plants in the rain gardens because of their water mitigation factor. Using the flood prone areas of your property. And again, if you're planting, you should probably use facultative on the top of it, facultative upland and facultative plants. But at the bottom, you should be using obligate wetland plants if it stays wet, or facultative wetland plants should be used at the bottom. So unfortunately, I made a mistake on this slide. It should say FACW, not U. I'll have to fix that later. But it's basically facultative wetland plant and obligate wetland plants at the bottom of your bioswale or your rain garden basins. If it's too wet, your upland species are also going to die. So, and again, here is a nice little rain garden. It puddles, it catches the water off of the concrete, off of the cement, off of the roads, and it holds it. And if you look very carefully in the middle of the picture, almost toward the top, you can see a duck, and the duck is using this sweet little rain garden And this is on a side this by the sidewalk of a city street in I think it was oh my goodness, where was it? I think it was in Minnesota. So they do a lot of rain gardening in Minnesota. Here's another one. This is a bioswale. And again, bioswales usually run with the contour of the land. They're used to reduce erosion, to slow the water down and allow it to percolate into the soil. They don't always absorb all the water. The rain gardens generally tend to absorb all the water, but usually at the end of a bioswale, there is a catch basin, and that catches the vast majority of the water and once again pulls it down into the ground. So they can be curved, they can be linear depending on what your contour of your land is. So they're very handy to have. If you have a downspout and your downspout is above the street and you want to just basically take your water and move it down to the street very slowly but surely, you can actually curve it around and make yourself a little bit of a lift so that it follows the contour of the land down, or basically just bring your water down into that. And again, if you have water on the street that's coming into your property because your property is lower than the street is, which is sometimes a problem, if you put a bioswale or a rain garden between you and the street, that would take care of a lot of the flooding issues, but you're going to have to dig it out. With a bioswale, the lips should be the same height on both sides. And again, the top of it should be upland or what is it, facultative upland plants or facultative plants if you have a sprinkler system. And then at the bottom, it should be facultative wetland plants or obligate wetland plants. And we're going to see a place where we can find out which ones are those, aside from going to USDA and looking up, is it obligate wetland? Is it facultative wetland? What is she talking about? Because there are websites you can do that. One of them is USDA plant database. The other one is, and I didn't put it in my notes here, but the Wildflower Center. My goodness, what is it? Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center has a link directly back to USDA, and they also sometimes will list whether or not the plant is a wetland plant or a drier plant. So on their own at that particular website too. So it's good to have. So now we can talk about the plants that you want to put around your soggy wet areas. Your top habitat and ecosystem service trees for wet areas and the bioswale bottoms and the rain gardens are going to be swamp white oak, which gets kind of big. So we're talking larger trees here. They go anywhere from 50 to 100 feet. You don't want to put them close to your house if you're concerned about that, but these are really good wetland plants that are also really good environmental and ecosystem workhorses. So swamp white oak, black willow, river birch, white oak, tupelo, sycamore, red maple, sweet gum, and sweet bay magnolia. These all grow with their roots in water, especially the black tupelo and the sweet bay. I've seen them growing in water. And they're really good at absorbing the water and pulling it down into the ground. So they go at the bottom of those catch basins if you want a big tree in there. If not, then we have some smaller stuff, which we'll be getting to in a moment. And the reason that I have numbers after these is because I've also used in addition to the Audubon database, which tells you which plants grow where or which birds are attracted to which plants, National Wildlife Federation, which I unfortunately did not include in this slide presentation, but National Wildlife Federation has a native plant database which tells you how many caterpillars the tree supports, how many species of butterfly and moth caterpillars. So that 521 under the white oak and the swamp white oak and the pin oak, 521 is a number of lepidopterans or butterflies and moth species this plant will support. The same thing with black willow. Willow is number 3. Cherry is number 2, but unfortunately cherries don't usually like it wet. And river birch is number 4. So the 4 top trees in the United States for making insect biomass are oak first, then cherry, then willow, and then birch. And then the rest of them, again, they're still supporting wildlife, just not quite as much. And we need those insects because insects feed everything else. They're the little engines that basically support the entire ecosystem, and all of our lives rest very firmly on their little tiny backs. So we really need to have insects out there. I am a strong proponent of insects, unless they're in the house, in which case then it's like you guys got to go back outside, or I will have to kill you. But if they're outside, that's where they belong, and then everybody else eats them, and they also eat each other. So usually they keep themselves in control. In the water, as I said, you should have some emergent and submerged vegetation so that the frogs and toads can lay their eggs, and the dragonfly nymphs and damselfly nymphs can hide. So these are some really good aquatic natives for in the water. We have submerged and emergent popping up out of the water. White water lily is the picture right here. See if I can mute him. Very good. Okay. So we have white water lilies, the American lotus. I didn't realize we had an American lotus, but we do. It's very pretty. It's a white flower. And it has a really cool little seed capsule when it's done. The mosquito fern, common waterweed, the longleaf pondweed, giant arrowhead, which is a really pretty looking plant. Pondweed, clasping leaf pondweed, wild celery, water arum, arum, and soft rush will grow directly in the water. There are others too that will grow directly in the water. But these are the ones that you find most often. Small native trees and shrubs for wet areas. And again, you can put some of these in drier areas, but they can grow directly in a bog. They can grow directly at the bottom of a rain garden and a bioswale. And so pussy willow is a really pretty little plant and it stays smaller. Again, now we're talking smaller native trees and shrubs. So we're not talking about single stem. Sometimes we're talking about, multi-stem plants that get to be 10, 15, maybe 20 feet tall. So they stay smaller, good for smaller properties, good for smaller ponds, and good for smaller water features. So the blueberries, which this is what this little bluebird is eating. High bush blueberry is a really wonderful plant. Low bush blueberries don't like it quite as wet, so you want to do the high bush ones because they really like it wet. The shrubby dogwoods like Cornus sericea, which is red twig dogwood, gray dogwood, silky dogwood, those are nice. They get berries in the summertime for the birds to eat. They support a decent number of insects at 129. And then rhododendron viscosum, which is swamp azalea. Also winterberry holly and elderberry are fabulous. And buttonbush, which I mentioned before, and sweet pepper bush. These all grow right in the water. Baccharis hamelifolia, which is groundsel tree, and also marsh elder can also tolerate salt. So if you have a problem with salt inundation, those are the two you want to use in your bioswale or rain garden. And then Calycanthus Florida is a more southerly native, but it's a really pretty plant and it is very attractive and it's semi-evergreen. So it makes it very nice by your pond. Native perennials and grass-like for wet areas would be, again, that switchgrass, Panicum virgatum, all the pie weeds and the thoroughworts, bone set, those kinds of plants. New York ironweed, the swamp tick seed, which is palustris. Palustris actually means, I'm pretty sure water loving or something like that in either Latin or Greek. So whenever you see palustris, it basically Rosa palustris is I think they call it pasture rose, but it's a wet pasture because palustris means wet area. Smooth mountain wint works really, really well. The cardinal flowers really like it wet. Swamp milkweed, which is Asclepias incarnata. The jewel weeds just show up a lot of the time because there are birds that have eaten the seeds or someone's carrying the seeds and they just disperse. And when it's wet, they show up, and when it's dry, they disappear. Cattails in the sanctuary. We had a very wet area and I planted cattails there. And sure enough, every year the cattails come up and it's like, how are there cattails there? And the reason that there's cattails there is because it's always wet in that spot. It's always reasonably soggy, if not completely saturated. Obedient plant is another really nice one. Unfortunately, I didn't put it on here, but turtlehead is another nice one. Turtlehead is Chelone glabra, is white turtlehead, and then Lyonii is the pink turtlehead, and oh no, it's red turtlehead, and then there's another one too. I can't remember the other one, but the other one's pink. Juncus and flexus, again, we saw a fusus, which is a soft rush, but stiff rush is also really good. And scouring rush, which is a very odd looking plant. It looks almost prehistoric. And purple pitcher plant is our native pitcher plant. Plus, we also have sweet flag and blue flag iris. Yellow flag iris is not native, so I do not recommend that by a pond, especially considering that it takes over everything. And then, of course, my very favorite fern is maidenhair fern, and it likes it reasonably wet. Not all of your ponds are going to be in wet areas because sometimes you want to put a pond where you want the pond to be and the birds can come to you. If you're not using a wet area to put in a bog or a pond or a bioswale or a rain garden, you can just use the best native trees for your local area, the best ecosystem trees, which would be really great. Again, oak, cherry, willow, birch, the top four with their caterpillar support. And then you have the aspens, cottonwoods, and poplars. Maples are really good. Pines are good both for protection from the wind, nesting, and also because they have a decent amount of insects in them. Hickory is a really nice tree. And if you get shagbark hickory, then you have a bat population, which will also help keep mosquito populations down because once again, we're talking rain gardens, we're talking water sources, mosquitoes. Everyone's like, oh, what do you do about mosquitoes? if we put in a shagbark hickory, that's where bats used to hibernate before we made bat boxes. So that's a nice tree. And American holly, which is an evergreen tree. And if you have a male and a female, you will get berries on the female. Same as with the winterberry holly. The hollies generally tend to be what they call dioecious, which means that you need a male and a female for the females to get berries. So make sure that if you have any of those hollies, you get a boy and a girl, or probably 5 or 6 girls and one boy. That way the insects can pollinate them and your girls will have berries. Small native, near native trees with excellent habitat services for our area are going to be service berries, the crabapple, the American crabapple, which is Malus cornearia, red cedar, which is Juniper virginiana, flowering dogwood, which is Cornus florida, eastern redwood, Cercis canadensis, the bare oak and the dwarf chestnut oaks, which unfortunately, can I remember what they are? And I don't remember. American arborvitae, which people are like, that's native. Like, yeah. Emerald green arborvitaes are actually eastern arborvitaes, and they come from the United States, American arborvitae. So, witch hazel, the winter hazel, Hamamelis virginiana, is winter flowering hazel, which is native to the area. Choke cherries, beach plums, American plums. Once again, they're in the cherry family. So a huge insect population lives in them, and the birds and the other insects will eat them. So those are great plants to have in your yard. Sweetback magnolia, which goes to dry, and gray birch, which also goes to dry. Red buckeye, which is further south, but is a really pretty plant, and the hummingbirds really love it. And it doesn't get very tall, 20, 25 feet. Pawpaw, which the pawpaw crop is coming in right now, and they are delicious, and they have different flavors. I happen to like a good pawpaw, even though they're not native to here. American mountain ash, which is unfortunately starting to climb it out, as I call it. It gets a little bit too hot. And we have black haw, which is a viburnum. Viburnum, which one? Lantego. So the viburnums are actually really good. Any of the Native American viburnums, high bush cranberry, viburnum lantego, viburnum plicatum, viburnum ovatum, a lot of them. And then the American snowbell, which is Styrax occidentalis, I think. So I'm starting to lose my Latin, unfortunately. And then we have our native southern shrubs with excellent services. So the red twig dogwood, the winterberry holly, which do grow in the water, plus the cleffer, the buttonbush, and the blueberries also really like water. But you have the viburnums and the choke cherries or the choke berries. Those are aronias, so not choke cherries so much, because there is a choke cherry out there, which is Prunus serotonin. No, that's black. But there's a prunus, a small growing choke cherry, which works really well. But choke berries also, the aronias also work. Raspberries and blackberries are also native and they're delicious. Pussy willow, which we saw before, and prairie willow, which is another native that's kind of a nearby native. American beautyberry, which is further south, but the berries are purple and the birds love them. Snowberry and coralberry are in the same family, roughly, and they're also further south and west. Carolina allspice and anise tree are also southern trees that we might want to think about moving up here. The sumacs are really fabulous. This bluebird is actually landing on a sumac, and the sumac that is in the picture right now is the sumac that you can actually pour hot water over and make tea, because it's high in vitamin C. And that's what Native Americans used to do. They used to collect the seed heads, and then whenever they needed something to cure, like a sore throat, they would pour hot water over this, this bunch of, I'm going to say seeds, and it would create a nice tea to drink to get rid of their sore throat. American plum will make a thicket for you if you're not careful, so you have to keep those pruned. And the same thing with the American hazelnut, but they will make a nice little bushy area for the birds to hide in. Virginia sweetspire, bush honeysuckle, which is Deervilla lanicera. So it's not really a honeysuckle, not like the Japanese honeysuckles, Lanicera tartarica and Lanicera, the Amur honeysuckles. We don't want those, but we have a native bush honeysuckle, which is called Deervilla. Rhododendrons are Rhododendron maximum and Rhododendron cotobiense, and also the azaleas, which are technically rhododendrons. So rhododendron viscosum was the swamp one. You also have periclinoides, which is pinkster azalea. We have shell pink azalea or pink shell azalea. There's a number of azaleas out there that you can put that flower in the spring, and they're really pretty. And then for evergreen, we have leucothoe, which is they call it either dog hopper or fetterbush. Creeping junipers, which are the lower junipers, not the upright junipers, which we also have. Juniper virginiana is a native, so that's the red cedar. But the creeping junipers are also Juniper horizontalis is native. So, and inkberry, which is a holly, and it's evergreen. well-behaved native vines that we can use, trumpet honeysuckle or coral honeysuckle, which is what this hummingbird is drinking out of right now. Virginia creeper, which everyone always says, oh, but that's such a weed. And yeah, no, it's not a weed, actually. It's probably one of the best vines out there. It actually tells the birds by turning red that, hey, by the way, my berries are ripe just in time for you to migrate south. And they're really wonderful because they have the right balance of protein and fat in addition to the carbohydrates that the birds need to migrate, where the invasive berries do not. And so what they're finding now, because now we put lotus towers everywhere, is that we lose a lot of birds over the Gulf of Mexico. And sometimes it's because they're, tired, and sometimes it's because they're old, but sometimes it's because possibly they're not eating the right food and they run out of energy halfway across and they fall into the Gulf and they drown or they get eaten by fish. So we lose a lot of the little radio tags in the Gulf of Mexico as they fly over. So we really need to get these native berries back into our environment here. Hops is a really good vine. Carolina jessamine is a vine that's from further south, and the wisteria is from a little bit further west. Ground nuts are really kind of cool. They're like peanuts almost, and you can eat the nuts if you roast them. Virgin's Bower, the American one, not paniculata, because Clematis paniculata is everywhere right now. It's flowering and it's white, but there is a native version that is much less aggressive, and it looks the same, except that the leaves are serrated instead of just the triple. So that's how you can tell the difference between the two of them. And then we also have American bittersweet. Sorry, that's my husband telling me he's coming home. And then you have the big vines: frost grape, river grapes, fox grapes, the Dutchman's pipe, which is Aristolochia durier, which will attract pipevine swallowtails in addition to a bunch of other butterflies. And there's also trumpet creeper, and trumpet creeper, you need to be very careful where you put that one, because if you don't put it where it's happy, and you start to disturb its roots, it will pop up 10, 15, 20 feet away from where you planted it. So be careful where you place the bigger ones, because they have a habit of jumping some places where they don't belong. On to our native, let's go. There we go. Thank you. Native perennials and annuals. Oh my God. Sorry. We have goldenrods and sunflowers, the pie weeds, which we talked about before. So basically all the same plants that you would put in a regular yard that are natives that we love, you can put around the pond as long as the pond doesn't have saturated water. So bee balms, monardas, the coral bells for shade, phlox in all the different heights. So you have Phlox paniculata, Phlox stolonifera, Phlox subulata, which is moss phlox, the creeping phlox. Scutellaria, which are the skull caps, the cardinal flowers, which I happen to really love. And cardinal flowers can go wet to dry, so you can put them in a bog garden, and you can also plant them by a pond that is not having saturated soils around it. So black-eyed Susans take it a little bit drier. The yarrow also will take a little bit drier. Violets like it in the shade. Geraniums also like it in the shade. Partridge pea is an annual, but it usually reseeds pretty readily. So, and the birds really like those seeds. And then, of course, there's false indigo, baptisia, which is one of my favorites. It flowers really pretty like a pea, and it cascades over a pond. So if you're looking for a nice cascading effect over a waterfall and you don't want to use a shrub, baptisia works really well, except in the wintertime, you're not really looking at very much. For well-behaved clumping ferns, we have northern maidenhair fern, which again is my favorite. Lady fern, male fern. Goldie's wood fern likes it a little bit drier. So does marginal sword fern or wood fern. That those two prefer it a little bit more dry. So you can mimic a a wet area by using ferns, and you can use the drier ferns for the really dry areas, and then you can use the regular ferns for, if something is getting a sprinkler system hitting it or you water it occasionally. You can use any one of the ferns, which work really well. You generally tend to see a lot of grasses and grass-like or sedges by ponds because they like it wet, but a lot of the sedges will also take it dry. So you can use Carex vulpinoides, which is fox sedge. You can use nigra. There's a number, Appalachica, which is a further southern and western variant. Pennsylvanica is a fabulous sedge. You also have Deschancia cespitosa, which is hairgrass, Sporobolus heterolepsis, which is prairie dropseed, Andropogon gerardii, which is big blue stem, Schizocurium scoparium, which is little blue stem, Chesmanthium latifolium, sea oats, which are really pretty. Muhlenbergia likes it dry, Muhlenbergia capillaris. That's what we find out in our own pine barrens. And then also the ones that look sort of like grass are Acorus, which will grow in water or dry. And then again, the Juncus, which are the rushes, which will take it dry to wet. Native ground covers, we have American ginger, Arctostaphylos uva ursi. Once again, the Carex is bunchberry, which is a really pretty little, I'm going to say a dogwood, believe it or not. It's a shrub. as is Arctocephalus uberursi. It's a very small, what they call a subshrub, and they don't get very tall. And Arctocephalus will take sun to shade, but it likes it really dry. So you have to be very careful where you put those. And bunchberry likes it shady but moist. Iris cristata is a nice ground cover. Also woodland stonecrop, which is Sedum ternatum. Gaultheria procumbens is a tea berry or wintergreen, excuse me. And it tastes really good. The red berries taste like wintergreen. So that's a nice plant. Fragaria, which is wild strawberries, they make an excellent ground cover. And the wildlife really likes the flowers. So if you're looking to cover a large area near your pond, these are good plants to have. Also, you have the violets, you have mayapple, which the turtles really like, box turtles. Tiarella is another good running plant, but doesn't run aggressively. And then Pachysandra procumbens, which is our native Pachysandra. So the flower comes up first and then the leaves come out, and it's not generally evergreen, except in the places that are protected or a little bit further south. We have bloodroot and also the two smaller phloxes, Phlox solinifer and subulata. They make really good ground covers too. When you put in a pond, there are things that you have to consider. And one of the things you need to consider is if you're going to be spraying pesticides. Generally, if you're putting your pond in a lower area or you're putting a water feature in a lower area, everything's going to flow down toward it. So if you're putting in a rain garden or a bioswale, it's going to pick up all of these chemicals. So think about that when you start to use your chemical pesticides, because you do have accidental poisonings and non-target species poisonings. There is no need to spray everything when only one plant has the issue. Just spray the one plant. If you can use regular organic chemicals as opposed to using, I'm going to say petrochemicals, that would be more useful. But even those chemicals, the organic chemicals, are still broad spectrum. They will kill everything. So just target the insect that you're having the problem with. Use the OMRI listed organics out there. And again, target the issue. Don't spray the plants that have no pest issues. And if you have mosquitoes and you're spraying cedar oil, I mean, that's wonderful. But the problem is if you're spraying it in the entire yard, what winds up happening is any plant that captures the cedar oil on its leaves are now feeding caterpillars. And if the caterpillars don't eat cedar specifically, they will die because they cannot digest the cedar oil. So people ask me all the time, where are my butterflies? And I ask them, are you spraying for mosquitoes? And they say, yeah, but I'm using something organic. And it's like, it doesn't matter if you're spraying everything. Just target the issue. If it's a mosquito, there are other things that we can use to get rid of mosquitoes. And just because it's organic doesn't mean it's not dangerous. So make sure you check those labels. These two generally tend to be insecticidal soaps are still broad spectrum pesticides. They're going to kill everything that they hit until they get dry. And sometimes they have a residual effect, so they will be hanging around a little bit. Pyrethrin is the same thing. Again, they become inert once dry, but they're still going to be broad spectrum. They're going to kill everything. So avoid spraying when pollinators are active. Try to do it only when it's like dusk and the bees are not sleeping on the blooms, because sometimes the bees will sleep on the blooms. And then if you have any that are listed as residual effect, don't use them on anything that a butterfly is being hosted on or a moth is being hosted on. So the caterpillar plants, you don't want to spray because you're going to kill all the caterpillars. Beneficial insects work better. You have pollinators, you have predators and parasites. Some of them are both pollinators and predators or parasites. And so you can release those. This is a lacewing larva. And if you release those, they will also keep your insect populations in check. You have things like lacewings, ladybugs, aphid mummies, hoverflies. There's a lot of predatory insects out there. And for the mosquitoes, we do have the biologicals. If you use this one here, this is Egyptiana. Bacillus thuringianus egyptiana, and that is is it a fungus? It's a microbial. Is it a bacteria? I think it's a bacteria, BT, yeah, Bacillus. So it will kill anything in the mosquito and fly family, so Diptera, which is a type of insect. So it's going to kill not just mosquitoes, but black flies, deer flies, horse flies, midges, and gnats, including fungus gnats. So if you use this in your water source, it will kill all of those flying insects, which means that you won't have mosquitoes, but you may also not have dragonfly nymphs because they have nothing to eat. It's generally very good to know your insects. So box elder bug looks very much like milkweed bug, but it's not the same bug. You should know your insects and basically target your sprays to the insects that you have that are causing the issues. A really great site-specific resource is North Creek Nurseries. And unfortunately, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see this, but they list the plants by obligate wetland, facultative wetland, what time of year it blooms, how big it gets, if it's deer resistant, if it's salt tolerant, etc. So wonderful resource. Audubon has the Plants for Birds resource. So if you type in your email address, it will send you, if you're clicking on the page itself, which is this page right here, your annual choices or your perennial choices, whatever plants you choose, it will email back to you the list of plants that you've chosen so you can go to your local store or your local native plant grower and say, I would like these plants, please. And by doing this, we will shift the gardening paradigm from basically ornamental plants to native ornamental plants because we know what we're asking for. And now we're going to get the growers to grow them for us because if we keep on asking for them, they're going to give them to us because it's cost effective for them to grow in large quantities, but not small quantities. So if everyone's asking for the same and clamoring for the same native plants, they will grow them. So that is our job to try and start doing that. So where do you find your native plants? And again, this will bring up a list of plants native to your area by zip code. And you search results by plant type, the resource that the plant provides, like nectar or seeds, and even by the type of bird you want to attract. And if you read onto the plant descriptions and decide on which plants you'd like, you can click on the plants box and create a list of plants that you can basically email to yourself. The little area that says local resources is really kind of cool because it lists all the local growers that grow native plants. So KMS Natives is listed on here. Dropseed, Anthony Marinello is listed on here. Linpea, a number of other places. Glover is a perennial grower, but unfortunately he is wholesale only. But he does that. We do have all the other ones on there. And additionally, we now have other people listed on there too that know how to plant native plants. You have local plant sales that you can go to. Rewild is right in the middle of their pre-order right now. Quick, get your plants, get them quick. We're having our plant sale this weekend. So the in-person plant sale, we already had our pre-order. But many of the Long Island chapters host plant sales, and also you can use the Plants for Birds website to create those plant lists. And as I had mentioned on the website, on both the TR website and also the Audubon's Plants for Birds website, there is now something called Help. And these are ecological landscapers that Audubon has been training to know how to do ecological landscaping. So if you want help to put in a pond, they do hardscape, they do softscape, they know what to spray, what not to spray, how to handle mosquitoes. And they basically, by teaching this program, we have now monetized the business model for ecological landscapers. So it's really wonderful to know that all of these efforts are being felt and that there are now people sort of like me who can go out there and say, I know how to do that. And I can put that pond in for you. I can plant the native plants that you need. I know where to find them. I know how to do this. So you will see if you put in a water feature, especially if there's already water near your house, or by wherever you're putting it in. Sometimes even if you don't have water nearby, you might see red-winged blackbirds and grackles because those are feeder birds, and they generally migrate using our rivers, but they also tend to breed near water. But they will be typical feeder birds too. So in the wintertime, you'll see, or when they're migrating through, and in the early spring, you'll see red-winged blackbirds and grackles at your feeder. But if you have a pond or a stream or a small water feature that holds water for the spring and summer, you'll get a bird something like this one. This is actually a common yellowthroat, and it prefers to breed in an area where there's a pond or a stream. So you might actually see these birds in your yard if you put these things in, which is good because we filled in so many wetland areas on Long Island that it hurts to think about. So if we maybe put some of the habitat back that they can use, hopefully we will start to see them come back again. And these birds don't eat seeds, they actually eat insects. So this is your biological insect control right here. So again, if we can please waterscape, landscape, pondscape, however, ecoscape the way that we should, like life depends on it, we really need to do that because honestly, it truly does depend on us. And that is the end of my talk. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much. That was a lot of information.
And it's
Um,
that's a good thing.
that was a lot of information. Thank you. It was informative. It was interesting. Nancy has a question here. So if there's
Ah, there we go.
So she's asked, in the past years, small frogs visited our garden pond, but no frogs have come this year. Do you
Uh-oh.
have any idea why?
Are they spraying for mosquitoes? Again, frogs are biological indicators. So If they come into contact with too much chemical, they generally tend to pass away. They generally tend to die. Plus, they don't live all that long to begin with. And there are a lot of predators out there that like to eat frogs. So raccoons, possums, skunks, yeah, they get eaten. So hopefully the the frog will come back, or another frog will find your pond. So we're gonna hope.
Nancy, I hope that answers your question.
There is a question at the beginning where you show the rain garden between the street and the sidewalk. Do you know where that is?
That was in Minnesota. Both of those were in Minnesota. Yeah, they're really big on rain gardens in Minnesota and at bioswales. They're very good at that. I found my frog left after I put in a pump. Will it come back? It may not come back. It may not like the splashing of the water, or it may have gotten, it doesn't. You have to be very careful and cover your pump so that the frogs don't get sucked into the pump if it's a powerful pump. So that's another issue too. We want to get the pump that's going to give you the most power that you need, but not an over powerful pump, because then it moves the water too much and the frogs and toads and amphibians don't like it, and it also moves their egg masses around. So generally you should try and make sure that the pump, if you have if you have spawning frogs, try not to run the pump until it's a little bit later in the season. And if you have spawning or if you had tadpoles in the pond already, make sure that there's a screen covering the pump so that if the tadpoles get stuck, they don't really stick there permanently, because that's another problem that you have with pumps. They will pull the tadpoles in, and then the tadpoles will wind up either going through the waterfall if they have big enough holes in the pump, or if the pump has a mesh and it's pulling really hard, the tadpole gets sucked into it and then it squishes, which is not a pretty sight. So I usually suggest, if you're going to try and have frogs in your pond, to box your filter, and make sure that it has enough the ability to pull the water in, but still allow the frogs and tadpoles to swim away.
Nancy says, thanks, expert advice.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Where's the help section of the Theodore Roosevelt Sanctuary website to find the pros? If you go into, I think, education, I'm just going to pop out right now and take a look because I happen to have it up. Oh, I'm in the wrong spot. I'm pretty sure it's in education. I'm using Chrome.
It is also listed at the end of the help.
Yes, I think Duong has posted the link right here in the chat box. The link here, Help Habitat and Ecosystems Land Pro.
Yeah. Does it work? Click on it. What does it say?
Yes, it works.
Yeah, I think it
works.
Yay. Okay, good.
Thank
And yeah,
you.
if you scroll to the bottom, you will see all of the people in the area. I think there's probably 14 or 15 of them now, which is really good, because in the beginning there were 6, and the 6 that I know of are not even listed there at this point. Actually, no, that's not true. Anthony Marinello and Kimberly they're both listed there. So 2 of the 6 are listed there, but the other 4 are not. And I'm one of the 4, and I don't do this anymore. So we need more. Because I am now teaching the program. So I need to be able to be available to teach the program. I do not have time to landscape. And I have to say that landscaping and trying to do this work 1 yard at a time is exhausting. So I figured, you know what? Let me just create a program so I can create more of people like me that want to be able to do this and want to be able to work with ecological landscapes and create viable ecosystems that look really nice in the managed landscape, as we call it. And so I said, why not launch this program? And that's what I did. I wrote it. I wrote a grant and a proposal for it, and 7 years later it finally launched. So woo! Took a long time.
Congratulations.
I'm really happy. And now it's able to be seen in a lot of different places. So it looks like we're going to be launching out of Greenwich, and then out of Cooperstown, New York. And it looks like eventually in the next couple of years, it may even go national. And who is it? The Doug Tallamy. So what is that? Homegrown National Park may also start listing our ecoscapers. I'll be talking to him in October, and I'm just waiting for them to find a new they just lost their executive director. So I'm waiting for the new executive director to be hired on, so we can start talking about how to network and basically collect people to be able to do this kind of things throughout the United States. So
Congratulations. That sounds wonderful. Yep.
It needs to be there.
There's a little question from me. Oh, there's Francesca asking, what are good programs for people who want to learn to be landscapers?
Farmingdale has a good ornamental horticulture area. You can, if you want to do, I don't know if they do it online or not, but there's a place over in, oh my goodness, now I can't remember where it is. But it's in the Midwest, so you'd have to go to college there. Brooklyn Botanic, no, excuse me, NYBG, New York Botanical Gardens, they're really, really good. And if you want to learn about ecoscaping and basically just take classes to slowly but surely learn, it's Ecological Landscape Alliance, ELA, is another wonderful place, and NOFA, Northeastern Organic Farm Association. All of these have continuing education classes, but they do teach these kinds of things. New York State has CNLP program, but that's usually building on somebody who's already in the industry. So if you want to get a formal education, I would say Farmingdale would be best. But if you want to get your feet wet, then I would say either the CNLP programs, Certified Nursery Landscape Professional Program, that they offer every, I think, early spring. Cornell Extension also offers Master Gardeners, but they don't do native, unfortunately. But they do a decent Master Garden program. And again, New York Botanical Gardens, they're really good at both the regular ornamental horticultural programs for certification, not for a degree, but for certification. They're really good. So,
And they do have online classes, I believe.
yes, they do. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Just a quick question from me. If the question is, I'd like to have a small little pond on the patio, let's say. What would be the resources I'd be looking at? And is there some kind of a place where I should check, see what I need? You know, I know it's,
For patios, for on terraces, for places like that where you want to have a small water feature.
Yeah.
If you can find one that has a shallow bottom and then cascades down so that the birds can take a bath in the shallow bottom, that works out really well. My husband just actually bought me a water feature, and it looks like a little pump. And the water cascades from one container down to the next container, down to the next container. But unfortunately, the birds can't bathe in that. So
because it's not shallow?
Because it's not shallow, because it's just too deep. So if you're looking for bird life, you definitely want to have a more shallow drip type system. So they have one that's a shallow wide bowl with a little dripper that drips down, and that attracts them, and it works out really well. So that's a nice water feature to have, and it's sometimes solar powered and sometimes not solar powered, depending on which ones you purchase. But you could also, if you want frogs and tadpoles, if you have a larger
native plants as well.
Native plants inside. So what you can do is you can buy a whiskey barrel planter, and then basically what we call tripping out for pond. So you buy a pond liner that fits in a whiskey barrel. And then you buy a pump that will splash water in, and then you buy a pot with a white water lily or one of the water lilies or some Elodea or the submergent plants that you can put in there, and that will attract the frogs, the toads, and at least the ones that can climb in. So tree frogs you'll get, but in order to get the terrestrial ones, you have to find a way to get a ramp up into it so they can lay eggs and then get back out again. Put ferns and things around it so that it looks naturalistic too. So
thank you for
thank you all for coming.
Wonderful
actually,
session. It was really nice.
Thank you, Francesca.
With all the resources and everything. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We really appreciate your talk today, and happy ecoscaping.
Happy ecoscaping. Thank you.